Welcome to this morning's meeting of the Scrutiny Management Board. This morning we're not being webcast live because there's a problem with the encoder, but the meeting is still being recorded and will be added to the website later. Therefore, as ever, in being in the room, we're consenting to our images being used and all the rest of it. Thank you for that. Welcome members of the public. This is a meeting of members. Members of the public are welcome to observe, but this isn't a meeting at which there's a hearing, so participation isn't available, so we would ask that you respect that. We have apologies today from Councillor James, and welcome Councillor Mrs Aspinall, who is no stranger to the Management Board at all, and it's nice to have you with us this morning, Mary. I'll come on to David in Chair's Urgent Business, but are there any declarations of interest we need to consider? Thank you. Under Chair's Urgent Business, the first thing I'd like to do is to wish, and I'm sure the panel will wish, to extend our best wishes to Diane and to thank David. This would have been his last Scrutiny meeting after a very distinguished career in Scrutiny in the Council. If panel will permit, I will write a card, not send an email to David, to thank him for all of that work. And I'm sure we will come to it later when we talk about the Scrutiny annual report in terms of how we mark it there. But, you know, David and Diane, I know, are in all of our thoughts. In David's absence, I'm therefore chairing, and I would like to propose to the meeting that Councillor Richard Bingley acts as Vice Chair for the Management Board for the period that David is absent from the Council caring for Diane. If people are happy with that. Thank you. Thank you very much. The only other thing I want to do is change the order of the agenda slightly, just to make agenda management a bit easier. So taxi licensing we'll deal with immediately we finished this item, and the Scrutiny annual report we will deal with before we go to the leisure services contract, because our intervening discussions will then potentially feed into the Scrutiny annual report. I have no other items of Chair's urgent business. So moving on, and on time slightly, I think, just about, to discuss the taxi licensing policy. I'd like to welcome Councillor Riley and Rachel Hind to put this into some context. The taxi licensing policy is something which doesn't fall down party lines. It's one which traditionally has been worked on with both cross-party working and working between the Executive and the Taxi Licensing Committee. And I'd like to thank Councillor Riley for continuing that tradition over the last year. I think that's been really important. The taxi licensing policy isn't a cabinet decision, it's a full council decision. So this hasn't been through the cabinet process and is due to be discussed at full council next Monday, when members will have opportunity to make any comment. We've therefore been asked to give a quick overview and make any recommendation into that council meeting. So this isn't a full scrutiny of the taxi licensing policy, but it is an opportunity for management board members to make any comment and to question as appropriate. So that's the context we're going into at this point in time. I think if I invite John and Rachel to make any comments that they might want to make, and then open it to any question and comment from members. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, depending on where you are with your agenda today, I'll completely in your hands. I can give you a quick few bullet points of the main changes of the taxi licensing. You've all had the papers, and hopefully you've had a chance to have a look through and see where we are. I can also give you a history of where we've got to today if you want that, but I know there has been that cross-party working and that consultation, so I'm not sure that that is appropriate for today. And then really, if I'll just highlight, for the sake of it going public and recorded, and anybody wants to subsequently review, if I'll just give you the bullet points, Chair, of then we'll go there. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. So we're looking at introducing a policy in 1st of May 2022. And the main changes to the policy, our current policy, will be a removal of the limit on the number of hackney carriages. And we can obviously answer questions about that if you want us to. A staggered approach to introducing cleaner vehicles by 2030, which is all part of our climate emergency action plan. A livery for new hackney carriage vehicles and for existing vehicles from May 2027. We're proposing that drivers can return to the trade within 3 years without having to complete the knowledge test. That's to encourage drivers who left because of the COVID thing to bring them back. You know, they had 20 years. They probably don't need to do that again. But we do think that the Plymouth Ambassador course and the English spoken test will now be prerequisites for new drivers. Both private hire and hackney carriage vehicles must take contactless payments by July 2022, and I can give you the rationale behind that as well if you want, Chair. The Department for Transport recommendations concerning additional DBS requirements for drivers, vehicle proprietors and operators will be introduced as part of the consultation. Operators will be required to keep a register of all booking staff and undertake safeguarding training. And 1 year licence fees in the first 12 months of a 3-year licence fee will now be non-refundable. So that's just a real bullet point of the main changes to the policy that we've currently got, Chair, and I'm happy now to take views or questions from the from members.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank you for the covering document, which actually explained those and your rationale, and also, I know they weren't printed, but the links to all of the other documentation, which I have had a quick flip through. There was plenty of it, but thank you for being so transparent in giving us all of that resource, and I know you've given that to full council as well. Does anyone have any question or comment that they want to raise on this? I've got a couple, but I'll let others go first. Councillor Mrs Aspinall, then Councillor Bingley.
Chair, I welcome being able to make some comments about it, and in fact, I did take the bit to do with wheelchair and assistance dogs to Padan, and the few comments we had back from them was basically accessibility and making sure that we have 100% of our hackney fleet are wheelchair accessible. And all right, it's not the big wheelchairs, and you'd never get them in some of the cabs, but you know, to have that so that manual wheelchairs can be accessed by everybody is brilliant, and we've got to say well done on that. I think one of the things that I really want reassurance is that a person that's wandering up and down a rank, at the moment it's very hit and miss. You know, you can find a driver that can't take somebody in a wheelchair because they have an exemption, and that, you know, quite reasonable. But I think although you have the little blue badge with, and you might have a cross through it to say he or she can't take a wheelchair for whatever reason, I just would appreciate if we could look at some sort of signage that's a little bit more visible, whether that's, and that being on the side windows. So whether you're right side or left side, that would be really useful. So poor Mrs Miggins, who suffers a lot in this city, doesn't have to keep wandering up and down and look. So that would be really useful. And
because obviously you've just raised a point. Let's do it point by point, because I think that might be helpful. And I do feel really sorry for Mrs Miggins, because she suffers so much that every single scrutiny panel hears a lot about Mrs Miggins in most agenda items. So over to you on visual identification for people with disabilities.
Yes, so actually we have just redone the badges, and they're in the process of being printed out and sent. And I can get Mark Small to speak to you before he sends everything out. But the badges will now be on the front where the taxis used to be. So when passengers are walking towards the vehicle, they can see them, and they're bigger with a more obvious symbol, because remember you mentioned this last time, and it's taken a little while for the new cards to arrive. So rather than being at the rear where they're not going to look from the back, they will be visible at the front. So that's been changed. So I'll send you an update with a new picture so you can have a look. And if you're happy with that, then otherwise we can make some tweaks. Thank you.
Very, very welcome, Chair. Excellent. And The
So
other thing
just checking, will that be on my recommendation list or
that
not?
needs, yes, please.
So you would like it to
I
remain on
would
the
just,
recommendation?
yes.
Yep, no, that's fine,
yeah,
that's
that'd be
fine.
great.
I'm just beginning to
Yeah.
scroll those down. Thank you.
And I think from the other perspective, from my side, is that basically having card readers in the taxis has got to be very, very welcome. Certainly from a safety aspect for any age. I think that that has got to be useful. Not having to take somebody to a cash point at 2 o'clock in the morning or even 2 o'clock in the afternoon has got to be welcome. So thank you for taking that on board. To me, that was one of those really important things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I'd agree with that. As someone who doesn't have a car and therefore either uses a car club car or a taxi, the only reason I go to the bank to get cash out now is because of cabs not taking cards. And I prefer not to have cash on me, so that was a very welcome thing. Councillor Bingley.
I think Councillor Aspinall stole my thunder a bit with the card readers, but I think it is good. But just sort of scrolling back a bit, Councillor Riley, I know personally has undertaken huge amounts of work with Rachel and the team on this. I think I had to look through the paperwork on the weekend and thought that there's a real balance to this. You know, there's a real energy. There is, you know, we've got the carbon emissions considerations. We've got the safeguarding around basically card readers, which provide the police with data if things go wrong. You know, it's irrefutable data. So from a law enforcement perspective, very good. And just generally, you know, the push to sort of lift the cap. I've always found in Plymouth that it has been a real struggle to get a taxi on most occasions, and I think you know that irrefutably, I think that has led to certain safeguarding issues for particularly for younger people and pensioners and disabled over the last sort of couple of decades. So well done. My sort of question is around the low emissions. You know, we've seen through our committee, the Brexit Infrastructure Committee, where we have pushed very hard on the climate reduction plan and the climate emergency plans. And I know it's, you know, there is an investment for taxi drivers, but pushing forward. But I just want to sort of know, you know, what the parameters are that you've set and whether they might be softened slightly given sort of the tightening economic conditions.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I'll just give a bit of a history to this, Chair, so just so know where we are. Climate emergency was declared by the Council back in 2019, and I believe it was under your Labour administration that was passed through. All members agreed it. We subsequently set up a Climate Emergency Action Plan team, which has worked tirelessly, and is continuing to work tirelessly to reduce our carbon footprint. This policy with regards to emissions is not addressing that at this moment in time, because we're looking at the Euro standard, which is not directly affecting the carbon. Now, if I can just put some context in it, before we went to consultation, we engaged thoroughly with the Climate Emergency Action Plan team and said to them, look, we've got a policy review coming up. What would you like to see with regards to our taxi fleet within the city? And they give us a set of criteria. That was, I think, very ambitious. I understood the reason why, but we were so concerned about that standard that we actually had a pre-consultation. So we went to operators and trade organisations before we even consulted on the policy and said to them, look guys, this is what our side of it would like in an ideal world. And the message was loud and clear. It's just not achievable. At the moment, the industry's not there, it can't do that. So we reduced that standard. And then, I won't get into the detail of ultra low emissions vehicles and electric and everything else. I'm trying to keep it in broad terms. So we reduced that standard. It went to consultation. The consultation then again said, this could be a bit of a struggle. So again, we looked at it, cross-party consultation, and said, is there anything we can do about this? It's going to be difficult. The industry's not there yet. We certainly can insist on electric taxis by any particular, we haven't got the infrastructure, we haven't got to get there. So what I'm going to say to you, Chair, is this policy is the first step in a journey, is really where we're looking. And going back to what Councillor Bingley brought forward, it's the first step in a journey to try and get us to a cleaner fleet, not only for our vehicles, for all public service vehicles. It's being driven by the government, as we know. It's the way we are. We've accepted it. So this is the first step, and we feel this is an achievable step, asking for vehicles to comply to Euro 6 emissions, which was 2014. So we're currently at Euro 4 emissions, which is back 2001 or 2004, I can't remember what it was exactly, but we're looking at Euro 6, which brings us up to 2014. So this the whole thing we're trying to do here is just take a step forward slowly. We've said by 2030, so that's 8 years away. So we're hoping that there's a period of time there that we can get there. We're trying to, our council target date is 2030 so that's why we tied that date in. If this committee recommendation today is we push that another year or two, I'm not precious about that. I'm not looking here to try and punish anybody or impose financial hardship on anybody or, you know, this is not what we're about. What we're trying to do is take a first step on a journey. We've got to make sure that we try and clean up the emissions on our streets as per the climate emergency that we've declared. And any way we can do that to take it forward. And so it's a first step on a journey for me, Chair, rather than get it all done next week.
Thank you. I had carbon on my list, so if I can tap in, because I spot Richard nodding about that. And obviously, having done this review now, there'll be a 5-year review, which will be before 2030 anyway, so I think you're right, this is a stepping stone. What I'm aware of is that this is about the taxi side of the business, it's not about the council side of the business. So I had a look at CAP, and I was specifically looking for what CAP said about taxi drivers. And so I'd like to actually have a recommendation that's not about taxi licensing, but is about CAP. So rather than to you, Councillor Riley, but to Councillor Bridgman, the current statement is that we will engage with taxi drivers to understand the barriers to the adoption of electric vehicles and develop a programme of support and promotion. To me, that seems really washy in terms of what the council will do to support the taxi industry with infrastructure. So I'd like to make a recommendation to Councillor Bridgman, or whoever might succeed her in that role, that CAP should be stronger on the infrastructure to support taxi drivers to decarbonise, both in terms of fast charging for electric vehicles at appropriate places, but also if there are ways in which cab drivers are going to need to finance things, that the council looks at how we can be involved in supporting the financing, even if that is us becoming the financer at a zero interest or whatever it might be, in order to support taxi drivers to make the change. I don't think at the moment CAP is strong enough on this. And I think while we're asking taxi drivers to be making the change, we as a council should also be saying, well, if we want you to do that, we should be supporting you. So I'd like a recommendation if the board is happy around that area, because I think, oh no, that won't come back until next February. It would mean that Bilco could then look at working with Councillor Bridgman on that aspect. Are people happy with that generally, and does that fit with where you might be?
So personally, I think it's a great recommendation, Chair. And you talked about the review that will come down the road automatically. It's driven by our legislative requirement, if I'm right.
Yes,
which will be,
the Department for Transport recommend every 5 years.
so every 5 years, we need to look at that policy. So that's fine. I'm going to say, in light of that recommendation, Chair, would you consider putting in an interim review? So maybe 2.5 years instead of waiting the 5, because the industry moves on. We can get feedback from the taxi industry as to what impact this is having, and would they need extra time, would they need extra support? They could then report back to us, and I totally agree with the involvement of CAP and whoever's in that role at the moment, Councillor Bridgman, to sort of all dovetail it together. So I'm not here to make recommendations, but I would suggest, on the back of you suggesting that we involve CAP more in the support of the taxi driver trade, that we put an interim review in internally, not obviously the Department of Transport, that Scrutiny can look at and say how it's gone in the first 2.5 years.
Yeah, I'm seeing some nods. Does that, and I think that this is a process of dialogue. I think Scrutiny should be about dialogue, and if we can help the taxi trade decarbonise and support an effective and sustainable taxi trade at the same time, that would be appropriate. If it is that internal review that is undertaken at 2.5 years, I'm happy for that to be part of that. So I think that's really useful. So thank you on that. Anyone else on carbon while we're on carbon? No? Richard, did you have anything else you wanted to bring up?
I think you're right. Let's have the review in 2.5 years' time. I mean, it's just around sort of getting the license numbers. The people doing this are very, very low, I think, compared to other cities. So probably there's an issue around sort of communicating the opportunity to be a taxi driver to communities we might not have thought about before. I don't know whether they're university students, whether it might be people coming in from other countries. If we've got high amounts of immigration coming in for various reasons internationally, whether there's sort of targeted work that we can do with different charities, NGOs, etc. But I just think we've hit a wall with recruitment, haven't we, over the last 20 years for one reason or the other, and probably this is a really good opportunity to break down some of those walls, if I can make a point on that.
Yes, a fair point is well made, and I would pass over to Rachel if it's all right with you, chairs. We were hoping to do some sort of promotions, stroke release, stroke public awareness. Obviously, if the policy gets approved on Monday by members, then we were looking to do a real sort of press release saying, this is the new look of the trade going forward. This is what we see as our vision. Would you like to be part of it? Here are the opportunities. This is what it provides. So I don't know I know we talked about that, Rachel. Can you put any further meat on that?
Yes, so certainly that gives us a really good opportunity to do that when it comes out in when it comes out in May. We also work very closely with there's two Taxi First and Cab have training schools for the drivers, so we work really closely with them to try and encourage new recruits. We also work closely with the job centre and the I can't remember what they call it, the army, like recruitment agencies and so forth. Yeah, so we do our bit. And it's quite hard because we aren't on obviously the recruitment agency, but we try and break down the barriers and make it as easy and as clear all our materials online and how they can become a taxi driver. But we can certainly do some more work on that. Thank you.
So an additional recommendation when we get to recommendations around that communication programme, and given the timings of full council, the calling of elections and an election, it is likely to have to be in May. But I think that makes sense. We want to encourage people into a business, not just to sit and assume that there's a business at capacity. Any other comments from anyone else? One of the bits I just wondered whether you might want to discuss a bit further, just because obviously in this environment you've got longer than 5 minutes to discuss, and on Monday you will only have 5 minutes. I just wondered whether you might like to talk a bit further about both why we would release the plating caps and the move to livery. Those are clearly contentious issues in the consultation, and although there will be no doubt speeches on Monday, I don't think you'll have the opportunity to talk about what your thinking was behind that. And if you're able to unpack that a bit further, it does give members here an opportunity to discuss that if they want to, and for the taxi trade to be able to watch this and hear direct from you about your rationale on both of those issues. Thank you.
So if I can answer with regards to the plating numbers, I'm going to have to defer to Rachel because she has explained to me half a dozen times, but I still don't fully understand. Chair, hands up on that. So I will defer. But on the livery side of it, I think there was a major driver. It goes back to the sexual abuse of children in Rotherham. And the Professor Alexis J report came out and it was quite clear. It had a whole section on where taxis played a part in trafficking and transporting vulnerable children around the city, primarily from fast food establishments to other fast food establishments. And then she also concluded in that report, so she made recommendations in that report. She also concluded in that report, so I'm just bringing this a document, but you're welcome to look at it. It also talked about if you think it's not happening in your city, then your head's in the sand like an ostrich. So and we then had the subsequent Oxford and Cambridge, wherever. So the other cities come out over that period of time. Rotherham was the headliner. So to whatever degree we need to safeguard against that. And this is what the livery solution was adopted by many councils for that reason. And to give you an history behind, way back in 2016, Guildford actually brought it in literally overnight. They said the policy's in force on January the 1st, and if you're not liveried up, you're not being a taxi driver, end of story. So the Guildford trade took the Guildford Council to court as challenged, and it was defeated. The judge held that the safety of the travelling public is of far more importance to what a taxi looks like. As a result of that, as I said, there's several. I think we've got Torquay, we've got Exeter, we've got Southampton, Brighton, Guildford that I know, Newcastle, place all over the country. Cities are taking on the liveried approach. There's another couple of aspects to the liveried approach which I want to touch on in a minute, but just before I get to that, I just wanted to say that it is all about the safety of the travelling public. And Darren Stoneman has assured me categorically that with the CCTV coverage in the city centre, if somebody was to be anybody, and I agree with Councillor Ashford on this, where we've got the Commission on Safety and Violence Against Women and Girls. We're looking at Safer Streets programme. We're really invested in that. So that is primarily our focus. But anybody, going back to what the data stuff that Councillor Bingley talked on, this is all about the tightening of the safety aspect of the travelling public and visitors to our city. So if he categorically tells me that if something, God forbid, was to happen, and that person was to say to the police, "Oh, I got in a taxi, I think my drink was spiked and I was pushed in a taxi around about between 9:30 and 10:30 outside wherever," then Darren's completely convinced that if the taxi is liveried up and readily identifiable, he would be able to pinpoint that, get it down. Not to where it goes out to Ivy Bridge or whatever, but within the city centre, and obviously pick up the ID. So that's the primary driver behind this, and I think it's right. I think it's right that we look at that. There's two added benefits that I can see in consultation with other councils with regards the livery proposal, and that is number one, it professionalises the trade. So back in 2016, we were looking at this scenario for Mayflower 2020. Sorry, not Mayflower. It was is it? Yeah. Mayflower 400. Sorry, not 20. In 2020, but we didn't have the time scale. It was far too much of a burden for the trade at that time, so we dropped that proposal. But what we did, what we gleaned from that consultation, I went into the Guildhall and sat there with 60, 70, 80 drivers who attended, and we talked about it. One of the main issues that they brought up is they did not feel respected by the travelling public. They feel that they're just treated like dirt, like public just get in the cab anytime and take me here, take me there, or I want to eat me curry and chips and whatever, and they just didn't feel respected. And we've had it, Rachel back now, well, she nods here, but we can provide you with documentary evidence that Brighton, years and years ago, brought this livery, a similar livery to what we're proposing in Plymouth, and I can come on to that again in a minute, the reason why. Brighton brought in this livery solution, and we've recently had a conversation with our counterparts in Brighton, and they've categorically told us, if you went to the trade now, after all these years, and said to them, "Look guys, we're thinking about scrapping the livery, you can go back to driving what you want." He said to a person, they say no, absolutely not. It's professionalised. The public look on us in a different manner. They see us there in a smart, the cabs are looking smart, and they get treated better. So we're hoping that is going to be a factor in recruiting more drivers into the trade. And the third and final one, which is, I think is a great spin-off, but it is a spin-off, is it really promotes the city. It promotes us as an international city, a destination. I mean, if you get it in New York, it's yellow cabs. If you get it in Hong Kong, it's red cabs with white roofs. I mean, you go to Lanzarote, it's the cabs got different colour roofs to do with what municipality it comes from. So the livery solution is there to try and drive forward professionalism and promote the city. I think there has been, and sort of semi-ready, so there has been a sort of, well, the black cab is the iconic black cab, but I would I would argue with looking at what various authorities have done now. The black cab was the black cab in the day in London. You can go back to the horse-drawn carriage. It was the iconic black cab. But today, we've got more non-black cabs in our fleet than we've got black cabs. So the numbers of other colour cabs are more than a black cab. And we also haven't got the traditional, you know, the TX4 or whatever it was, that iconic. Now you've got Mercedes and Renaults and Fords and reds and blues and silvers and whites. And so we've got that. So I think bringing that all together, irrespective of what the vehicle looks like, the livery is the solution, is a right way forward. And finally, Chair, I'll just say on the colour scheme that we've proposed, which I know that you've seen, it's purely because it's Plymouth's corporate colours. If you look at our vehicles, our highway vehicles driving around, they're white they've got the green, the badge. If you look at the bus stops, they've got the white surround, the badge. I mean, I've got the Plymouth. It's our corporate city colours. So I think it's right. Other cities have gone down that road, and I think it's the right way to go. So that's the reason why we are where we are with the livery. And I genuinely believe that years from now, it's not going to happen overnight, but years from now, we will look back and say that was a good move forward. You know, it's provided a real good identity for the city, promotes the city, the international destination, and I think it's right for the city, Chair.
Thank you. And on that, obviously, there are some costs attached, and I've read the report. Once again, people watching this might not have read the report. Could you just give us some assurance about how long the trade is going to have to implement that?
So, Chair, when we spoke to our counterparts again in Brighton, and the only reason we were liaising so closely with Brighton is their livery solution is very much so. Our counterpart, I can't remember the name, Richard, but our counterpart in Brighton said that what happens is when a driver is going to renew his vehicle, they buy a white one, so there's no respray costs. I think we've already got 35 or so white cabs in the fleet anyway. So they buy a white one, and then they wrap the bonnet in the boot and stick a sticker on the side saying Plymouth City Council licensed taxi. So there's no doubt when people turn up from Japan, South Africa, Canada, they know that they're getting into a safe vehicle. So when we spoke to them about 9 months ago, they told us that that cost is about £200 to £250. So I've sort of pushed that out to 300 with the cost of living going up. I understand that cost of living, gas, electric, water, fuel, every national insurance, it's all going up, and the taxi drivers are going to be affected just like the rest of us. So we don't want to bring it in on the 1st of May. So we've talked about a 2027 solution, which is 5 years. Why did we arrive at 5 years? Excuse me. Historically, between a quarter and a third of the fleet change each year, not to brand new vehicles. Some have brand new vehicles, but the majority upgrade. So between a quarter and a third of the fleet each year will move up in years. And then, so we looked at that and said, oh, say a quarter, let's go to a quarter. So in 4 years, most of the fleet will be upgrading their vehicles anyway. Let's put another year on it to make it 5 years. 5 years, if the cost now is 300 quid, works out at 50 quid a year, sorry, 60 quid a year, is £1 a week if you start putting a few quid back. So we didn't think that cost was, overbearing. So that's why we arranged the 2027 date. If committee recommends we push it to 28, 29, I'm not going to get defensive over it. Again, you take your judgment on that. But I can't. I don't know if I should say this, so stop me if I've got it wrong, Chair. We're making strenuous efforts, and I've got the support of the Cabinet and the leader, and we're already in the process of trying to find a funding stream. There are incentives, grants, and schemes out there that promote public transport, and what I'm hoping to do is to provide a fund to give taxi drivers a grant for when they first put their livery solution into the vehicle. I cannot declare today that I've got that, I've secured that, it's there. But if we go back to the cross-party working thing, Chair, we are working strenuously. to try and secure the biggest part. We wouldn't be funding all of that cost of wrap, but the majority of the cost of that wrap to a taxi, we would look to try and fund in the form of a grant. We're actively doing that now. Directors are actively doing that under the guidance of Brendan Arnold to try and secure that stream. That stream, if you look at it over a period of 5 years, because we said it'd be a staggered approach, in terms of the money that council spends is very, very small. So I'm confident, although I need to stress I can't formally announce it today, I'm confident we will be able to support the drivers financially in some way in the changing over to the livery. And I would like to think that if administrations change, then that work that we've started would be continued if it was a different administration chair. So that's the livery thing. With regards the license plate and the numbers, that's over to Rachel.
Let's pick up on any livery stuff. I think that is reassuring for me. Obviously, you've been able to give more rationale and explanation than is possible in a covering paper. So I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the comments you've made about trying to support the drivers even further. I think that's positive. And also, you're not doing what Guildford did. You're not requiring a trade to transform overnight. You're giving a 5-year window, and I don't think that is, personally, I don't think that's unreasonable. So I welcome what you've said there. And as I said, I don't think on Monday you would have had time to unpack just one element of the entire thing. I think that's part of what Scrutiny is about, and I'm personally reassured. And I know I was in Brighton last year. Like many politicians, Brighton is a resort that we visit every few years. And it is reassuring when you go into a city to know that you're getting into a cab that is licensed, not just someone who says that they're a cab driver. And so I quite get that. So I'm happy on that. Any other comments on livery from anyone? Yeah.
So just and a final support, it sort of dovetails in not only with the livery, but it dovetails in with the recruitment side of it as well. Our colleagues in Brighton told us a couple of things. They said, if you want to be seriously taken as a city of tourism destination, your fleet's got to be liveried, end of story. What they've done, which I think is something, again, cross-party we need to look at, is their vehicles are white with a sort of taupey colour on the boot and the bonnet and whatever, that's their colour. But what they've done and what we propose to do, and I hope, because this is not a 5-minute thing, but it is a 5-year, 6-year, 7-year thing, what I would like to do as well in support of the trade and encourage people in the trade and to advertise the city and professionalise it even more, is what we do is that colour, that green, that corporate green, becomes our city furniture. So Madeira Road, which they've got their pier, Madeira Road, the flagpoles, the park benches, railings, as our maintenance programme progresses over the next 4 or 5 years, all the city street furniture, bus stops, as I said, railings, flagpoles, lampposts in the city centre, all that becomes that corporate green. And then what that gives you is it gives you that whole identity in the city. So that's something else that we're hoping over that. Again, it's not going to happen overnight, but over a period of time, we'll professionalise though and give that international city destination.
Great. I think we'll probably take green and white rather than just green because of the nature of where some of the things are. White is sometimes more visible as a handrail than green would be. But I think I can quite understand that, and it frustrates me when I walk around my ward that we've got navy blue and pale blue and white and silver lampposts that all look really higgledy-piggledy, and it would be great for there to be a sense of place. So I support the fact that you're working not only within cross-party within your area, but also looking at how that links across other council agendas. I think that's one council approach, and I think that's positive. I know we're running behind a bit, but you just want to talk a little bit about plating, Rachel.
Yes. Thank you. So as you can see in the paper, I've laid out kind of the reasons why. So we've considered the consultation responses, and then within each of those, we've kind of justified why we still think it's good to carry on with it. So the Department for Transport advice is that you shouldn't really limit. It gives you more, it's more of a competitive approach, and also there's quite a few drivers, particularly during the pandemic, who've stopped being a Hackney carriage and then wanted to return to Hackney carriage and haven't been able to. They're okay if they can find someone who's selling their vehicle at that particular time, but a number have just left the trade, and once their licence has elapsed or they've returned it to the council, we can't reissue that plate. Whereas private hire, you can come and go as you please. It costs us about £18,000 every 3 years to maintain a survey to be able to make sure that limit is kept. And over the past, since 2016, we had 360 licences. It went down to 343 in 2019, which is why at the last survey they recommended keeping it at that and then letting them die off, so not replacing them. And now it's down to 304. So I think it's important to open up the market, to allow that competitiveness, allow people to return to the trade, like you say, and not have that restriction in place. And hopefully it'll help in the night time, because one of the recommendations of the last survey report is we need to encourage more drivers to work at night. And that's where we really do struggle. The police and the taxi marshals say there's not enough. And I think by opening it up, people will know when they're coming in, that's the time, that's the time if they want to make money to work at night. So I think that will be a benefit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And certainly, as I said, as a person who uses taxis and who has some health issues, having to walk from another part of the city home, and I don't drink, so it's not that I'm drunk, it's just that actually by that time of the day my joints are really suffering. It can be really painful if there isn't a cab available. So, I would welcome, and I'm sure I'm not the only person, I'm sure vulnerable people would also welcome more cabs available at night. Any more questions or comments on that? We've given more time than we thought. I thank you both for the time you've given today and in the preparation for this. I think, and Ross will no doubt add if I've missed anything out, that we have effectively 5 bits that we are coming out from today to say. One is that we broadly endorse the work that you've done, and thank you for the work and the way you have approached it. That there's a recommendation to further enhance it through visual identification of cabs that can't take wheelchairs. I know we've talked about it, but we will then be able to present that to full council. The interim internal review on carbon emissions after 2.5 years, and a communication campaign, not just a one-off communication to potential taxi drivers to join the trade. I think those are the ones directly relating to your policy. And then the 5th one is the broader one on CAP and what that should be doing to support infrastructure and financing to decarbonise the fleet. I think those are the areas that we've raised as recommendations. On that basis, our management board happy to put that into a report that would go to full council on Monday? Yeah. Thank you all very much. I appreciate the time you've put into this and the management board in reading the background paperwork and being able to come to you. So thank you very much. Really appreciate, as ever, your involvement.
Yes, so thank you, Chair. Thank you for your recommendations to the committee, and we're happy to take those on board and consider them implemented. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we're slightly behind schedule, but the next few things that we're going to do sort of will feed into one another, I think, as we go through, purely because as we look at the budget scrutiny debrief, the peer review feedback, and the forward planning issues and feedback from all of our panels, they are likely to all feed into the scrutiny annual report. So although we have subdivided the agenda somewhat to help focus it, I think they will all work. So sort of working on that basis, we'll work towards all of those being concluded by 11:45 so that we can then move on to the leisure services contract review, which has come in from a panel. So let's start with budget scrutiny debrief. And this one is really down to us and an opportunity for us to have discussions.
Chair, just as a aid memoir, the draft annual report I've tabled for you has got the budget process we went through, just if it's helpful to refresh your memory. It's right at the rear, I think, of that report.
Thank you very much. We were half of the budget scrutiny panel. So we have it there. I think in debriefing, part of what we need to do is think about what recommendations we begin to put forward for the way next year's is structured. I think both from the session itself, or the sessions themselves, and the report I gave back to full council during the budget debate, there was concern around the level of information that we were able to scrutinise to make effective recommendation about savings. That £20 million, you know, I remember back in 2012 when I was first in Cabinet, it was £65 million in 3 years we had to find, or £68 million in 3 years we had to find. That is fairly consistent now. It is about £20 million a year, give or take. You know, it's ridiculous to talk about give or take on a figure that big, but so every year the council knows we're going to have to take that sort of decision. I would suggest that budget scrutiny is an opportunity, if the final budget hasn't been drafted, for options to be put out so that scrutiny can give some thought as to the different impacts of decisions that are being made. And to do that, we need the information to be able to make recommendation from. I was frustrated that we had a £13.5 million or £13.8 million gap that was at that point unidentified and did lead to some concern. So you know, there is that element. We looked at the Torbay figures, which was a full budget line by line breakdown. What the Torbay figures didn't give was the comparison to the previous year, so you couldn't see who was getting more or less. But it would have enabled, that sort of documentation would have enabled further understanding so that there was rational questioning. So you know, there's some first thoughts from me, but I see Richard leaning forward very potently, and Councillor Mrs Aspinall. So Richard, Mary, I don't know which one of you wants to go first.
I think it chimes really, Chair, with what you're saying. You know, it was just over a day and a half, wasn't it? And I felt right from the outset, actually, I felt that there was no information to grip and detail to sort of dig into. And I have been through this process before, but not in Plymouth. And it was exactly that we had different options. You know, that a reduction of 0.5% or 1% here or there would lead to these consequences. So I kind of felt it was just a little bit like sort of bad ice skating, you know, for a day and a half. We just couldn't really sort of get to grips with it at all. So that's that side, you know, I sort of widening it out, you know, sort of consultation around the budget, just the ethos of that, I think, has been disappointing this year, if I can put it politely. But probably sort of the briefing going into it, if we'd have had deeper briefing, maybe we might have realised what was going to happen in that day and a half session. So I sort of feel maybe we should have sort of had a more in-depth session before Christmas. But overall, you know, I think this year the council hasn't treated scrutiny that importantly. I think that, you know, you only get to good decision making by asking intelligent questions and by digging around and looking at different evidence sets. And I just didn't feel that that was reflected within the papers and the preparation particularly. So I think sort of moving forward, there's a lot of lessons around, having data from previous years, having comparative data, maybe from other similar council areas, giving people a bit more time, you know, where we sort of need to sit down a bit earlier in, maybe not in December, but sort of a bit late November. And but nonetheless, I mean, you know, some of the positives come out of that. I thought we worked collaboratively. I think everyone was sort of on the same page in terms of where we wanted the focus of spending, you know, adult and social care and around education, children's care, etc. Some really sort of passionate questioning. And it, you know, as a council-wide sort of cross-party team. I think Scrutiny worked in that way. I think constitution. I mean, it's a bit of a two-party system here, but I'm sort of slightly disappointed that you know we do have 11 independents, so-called independents at the moment, and that they sort of are absolutely not involved. And I think pushing forward, administration should consider how those that are not affiliated to major parties are more involved in the scrutiny process. So no, I think you know this was an example of we must massively improve this. Scrutiny is a very, very good thing. Most councillors in council feel that scrutiny works. So let's learn the lessons from this and let's make scrutiny better. This is not a reason to reduce it and to limit the evaluative role of councillors in the future.
Thank you, Richard. I agree with so much of what you've said. In fact, I agree with all of what you've said. So, Mary, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, to me, part of this was indicative of the way a lot of our members don't understand what scrutiny is about. And that was something I was going to raise when we get on to looking at scrutiny generally. I think there are new-ish members who don't understand the power of scrutiny, quite honestly. And I think certainly the sessions that we had, the pre-budget sessions with each of the committees, I can only obviously speak from the health side of things. We get good budget information coming from Craig and the team, but I don't think everybody that attended that meeting particularly understood what the outcomes needed to be from those sessions. And I think that then compounded when we were putting thoughts forward about what we're concerned of. People didn't quite understand what they were all about. And it's the first time we've done those pre-budget sessions with the committees that I can remember. And I just don't think everybody appreciated what was supposed to come out of them, which then, of course, led to all of us sitting on it in January. Because, of course, we don't know what the budget is in November and early December when we talk about it, because the government haven't announced it, as we know, that becomes the problem, that despite saying they'll do a 3-year thing for us, they haven't. They've done the 1 year. So, yes, it's all compounded by what government do and allow us. But certainly, it is always a very fine balancing act between having too much paperwork for going into the budget scrutiny and not enough. And I don't think it was quite right. And I'm not blaming democratic support at all for that, because they can only be as good as what the information coming from the departments are. You know, they can go and try and, it's like hen's teeth, isn't it, basically, sort of trying to get information at times. So I think this is something that goes out to the corporate centre that says it wasn't sufficient. You know, Brendan and his team hadn't got it right. No two ways about it. So yeah, it wasn't good, and you were very ably able to pull out bits and pieces that we needed to get from one day to the next, and that was great, because else I think we would have been all saying, sorry mate, we ain't going to make any judgment on this because we haven't got enough stuff. And I think it was pulled out of the fire by the fact that you were able to recommend getting X, Y and Z. And I just don't think it was the most unpleasant scrutiny that I've sat on. And I think probably as a chair or vice, I've been sitting on budget scrutiny since about 2003, 2004, and it was the worst experience as far as the information. And I go from David Stark wanting 10-foot high paperwork to others saying, no, we only need this, that and the other. And as I say, I've never felt so unprepared. I think, you know, it just was not a good task. And I think we were fortunate to come out with the recommendations, etc., that we did at the end, but not good.
Jemima?
Well, I think Richard and Mary have said more or less what I was going to say, that actually, despite the process, despite the lack of information, I think, you know, thanks to Chris's tenacity and then us I think we actually worked well as a team, all of us who were on the panel, we came out with a good set of recommendations. And I would only comment that I was really surprised to be upbraided for referring to the Conservative manifesto in relation to the budget, because I felt that was a fair thing to do, and I did refer to it a number of times. And I was accused of being hung up on the manifesto, which I thought was a really strange comment, because actually that's your offer that you've put out to the city, and I think it's only fair to, you know. And in fact, a couple of the recommendations were crafted around some of the manifesto commitments which hadn't been addressed in the budget paperwork that we'd given initially. But yeah, it was an interesting process. The pre-scrutiny session that we had in children's, I found useful actually, but I know other people have differing views about their sessions. So I don't know what the plan will be for the next budget scrutiny. I don't know whether we need to recommend something around how we do it next time. Do we do that here now? Because this was sort of sold to us as an experiment, so hopefully feedback is expected and wanted, and I think it's important that we do that.
I think ultimately it's down to scrutiny to say how budget scrutiny works. It's not down to the executive to say how we will scrutinise, or officers indeed. I think when we were first presented with the option, it was, we want you to have one day, which would have included working out recommendations. We stretched it for an extra half day to think about recommendations. I'm glad we did that, because we really struggled then because of the one day. We also added in the ability for more scrutiny panels to be engaged with those pre-Christmas briefings. What we did ask was a look forward in those sessions to look at challenges and possibilities so that members could engage in private with cabinet members about those issues. Obviously, I can't speak for all panels. I wasn't in the one that I chaired because COVID had really wiped me out, but I did attend the Bilco one. And it was really a review of how fantastic everything was, rather than and I understand this was from my panel as well, rather than here's where we're facing. And what that led to was, when we finally got the figures, was the proposed budget, which showed all but one of the directorates with an increased budget for next year. And that was what we were being sold, not these other changes. And I'm sorry, if you're going to be cutting budgets, not everyone can have more than they had the previous year. Yeah, there's just somehow a logic. So I think we need to find ways to engage not just the people who are sitting on the Scrutiny Select Committee. If that closed session was able to be about the challenges and thinking, what we would have had were some recommendations from each of the panels about what the Scrutiny Select Committee should have been looking at. Obviously, we went through this process with a change in support as that happened, and I think that might be part of the reason, but I'm not saying it's all of the reason, because we were fairly clear what we wanted and we didn't necessarily get it. So I think we need to do that. I also specifically asked Brendan and Tracy to make sure that every councillor was briefed, not just members of select or scrutiny panels. So there was an all-member briefing organised, but it sort of was the headline of the information that we had in our pack, which was the December report, rather than any of the solutions. So I'm not sure that Richard's comment about how we engage with people who aren't the administration and the official opposition was properly addressed. And I think we do need to think about that in future years, because clearly there's the proportionality argument, and let's not get into the proportionality argument in terms of committee places, but that people are councillors and should be able to be making informed decisions. So I think we do need to be thinking about that for next year as we go forward. And before Mary said David's name, I'd got David's name on my piece of paper, because I know the first scrutiny, budget scrutiny I went to was in 2012 as a new cabinet member. And I spent Christmas with an arch lever folder that wasn't slightly closed, it was actually slightly open, and within there wasn't just A4, there were A3 foldouts with lots of detail on it, and David Stark complained he didn't have enough information. And we had been through, now that might be slightly too much information, but this year's budget pack was substantially less than that. And when you took out Treasury management reports and other bits and pieces, the actually budget information was sort of a matter of sides, and that doesn't help us. So I think the paperwork balance does need to be looked at, and maybe what we do need to do and recommend for next year is that it doesn't just come to management board, but actually the budget panel is set up relatively early in the municipal year, as if it is going to be chairs and vice chairs or whatever, not as a you can't sub into, but as an advisory group to the management board to look through how we will approach the budget process. Because obviously we can't have if we can't have someone attending one of the meetings as a sub, that makes it a bit difficult. So we need to find a way to deal with that so that we are able to actively support the administration in making good budget decisions. I think whatever happens, Plymouth is always a close council. We've had quite a lot of minority administrations in the last decade, and for that we need to have the council on board for things, and if we don't, we end up with the sort of not bad behaviour, but the sort of challenge at budget scrutiny, not just on minor amendments, but on fundamentals, because actually people haven't been brought on board. And I think there is a role for scrutiny to make sure that backbenchers from all parts of the council are able to be involved in the process prior to a budget meeting. And yes, that doesn't stop anyone moving amendments, but we shouldn't be at a point where the administration is so out of kilter with the majority of council members on budget day. And that is worrying for the effective management of the city. And that's not a party political point. We should be working for the good of the city together on this. And so there is that element. And I think, echoing Jemima's point on the manifesto got woven into the corporate plan. So while it's easier to refer to the manifesto because you can see the exact promises, they are the council's corporate plan. And as well as doing stuff for backbenchers and members on scrutiny, I think the administration need to understand that their manifesto, if they are the elected administration, is the corporate plan of the council. And therefore questioning on it is valid. Now, I'm not sure how we make that a recommendation in anywhere, but I think it is important that we understand, that administrations understand their promises once they're elected are the commitments of the council. And it's right for us to be able to question them, whoever the administration is and whatever they promise. And if they say they're going to paint every building in the city pink and they don't, then we need to say, why haven't you painted every building pink? And I've gone to an extreme because actually there are some political parties, not those in the main administrations in the city, who do make stupid promises. And if they do become in the future an administration, they need to be held to account too. Mary, you put your hand up.
It's also that whole thing about the portfolio holder versus the officers when they come. You know, the portfolio holder is there to put the political side and the political steer, and then the officers to give that fine tuning about how that's being implemented. And I think some of the times we were shown during that budget scrutiny that there wasn't that understanding of what happened. And I think then the other thing is, of course, as I say, it's coming back to those more general things about sessions, and we'll come on to it in a minute when we're looking at the scrutiny process per se, is making sure that we start doing some training sessions for all councillors if they're going to sit on scrutiny, and some specific for each panel, but I think there needs to be that general thing. But of course, independents can't at the moment sit on scrutiny unless they become a group. And that's what they've not done. If R11 had joined up and become a group, then Ross would have had another headache thinking how he was going to get that proportionality on scrutiny and on any other committee. So I think whilst I have great sympathy for the independents, they have obviously been very independent in Plymouth and decided not to form a group. So I think that compounded the issue. In the past, we've had 3 or 4 of them that have joined together to make a group, so that then became different. So I think, yeah, we need to see what happens, obviously, after this election in May as to where we go forward from there.
No, it was only just what you were saying about your example of painting buildings pink. It isn't about, from my point of view anyway, it wasn't, why haven't you painted the buildings pink? It's like, where is it in the budget that you're going to paint the buildings pink? Those were my questions. And if it wasn't going to be in this budget, there could have been an explanation of when the plan was to do it. But it was a sort of defensiveness around why are you asking me about what's in my manifesto, which I just thought, as a budget scrutineer, as a ward councillor, you're just asking questions on behalf of what your residents would be asking you, expecting you to ask.
And I think that's right. And that we are sort of already saying things that aren't just about budget, but broader things. So there's this sort of, yeah.
So I came into the budget scrutiny session about halfway through the process, about halfway through this year. So it was quite interesting to see, I think, a proposal that we probably made a number of years ago take place. And I think we've had a number of different goes, and I think if you sit in one place long enough, the same thing will come past again. I wonder, Chair, just in terms of how you approach budget scrutiny as a whole, I think in the past, certainly with scrutiny, it's been quite passive, in that you're receiving documents and then making a judgment based on those documents. I wonder if there is a process of challenge that might be more helpful in the future. So if, for example, you might forecast 2 or 3 different scenarios, say inflation's running at X%, you're going to be expected to make X% savings in your budget, your settlement is going to be X%. What would you need to do to resolve that? And I think something along those lines in the future, where you can set some conditions. These are the conditions you'll be operating in the future year. What do you think a council would look like in those conditions? Might be a helpful way to get yourself into those sorts of discussions. The other thing, just on reflection of so the panels are back to 4 now. I wonder if it's just something that we add into agendas for business meetings generally, when it comes to work programme or tracking decisions, whatever it might be, the standing items on a scrutiny agenda. Whether you identify things for budget scrutiny at that point, and then look to feed that through the management board, just as a route into gathering those thoughts from the wider scrutiny membership to inform your budget scrutiny going forward. But I think there is a way that we can try to turn our thinking on its head a bit in respect of scrutiny. We've very much been passive recipients of information over a number of years, and I'm just wondering if members were to be a little bit more proactive about what they expected, and if, as you said, Councillor Aspinall, we don't generally know what the final settlement's going to be until January of the year that we set the budget. But if members had a discussion early on with finance about what's some of the conditions that we might be facing in the future, that might help you draw out some of those discussions a little bit more.
I think you're right. And when we asked about the assumptions, it took quite a long time to get any admission at all about them. And I did notice between our meeting and the budget, actually a lot of the questioning we raised about inflation, not just general but specific areas, were then adopted in the budget. But we would be guaranteed that the assumptions were all right. I hasten to say that when we've done finance stuff in our scrutiny panel, we were assured that the CREM was on time, New CREM Cemetery were on time and on budget. Yet, by the time of our next meeting, the budget had happened and there was a substantial increase in costs. Now, that must have been known about at the time of our previous scrutiny panel, but we were told everything was all right. So actually, there is a process about a degree of honesty with scrutiny panels about challenges that are being faced that moves us into some of the next areas of business. And I think you're right. We need to be looking at this as a whole, and maybe if you were to give us a bit of feedback from the peer review at this point, because all of this feeds into what we're doing next. And the peer review, I think, obviously Richard wasn't able to participate, so Pam took your place. But we did have a session with the peer reviewers. Unfortunately, no one from the scrutiny side was invited to the debrief. So although we were given an indication in that private session that there was a sense that scrutiny needed some external review and support before any changes were made to it, that was as far as we got. I know the formal report isn't in yet, so we're not sure what the final recommendations might be, but I just wondered whether you were able to give us a bit of a sense on any recommendations that were particularly around scrutiny or anything else that we should be aware of from that.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so as you said, the final report has not yet been received by the council, and then of course there will be a process of accuracy checking and so on and so forth. So I think the expectation is that we're likely to see the full report post-election now. Now, I've not been involved in the feedback either, Councillor Penberthy, just to just to reassure you all, we're all equally in the dark. However, I have been made aware that the peer reviewers have suggested that an external review of scrutiny should be a recommendation that we may consider. So that's a draft recommendation, and that's in order to enhance opportunities for members to engage and influence the policy agenda. A part of that is going to be about member development. So it's going to be really key in the new municipal year, that induction programme, which I think my intention is absolutely to open up to all members of the council rather than just scrutiny members, and certainly focus on some contextual briefing about what's actually going on in the city. I think peer reviews are also quite keen for us to continue introducing more transparency in relation to our budget setting, so that might help you with some of the things that you've just discussed. But certainly the view seems to be that we could benefit from an external review of our scrutiny function. So it might be helpful if members want to give some steer today, just about what that might look like. I mean, some of us have had a few of them before, Mary, so perhaps with your experience you could offer some assistance on what external review should look like.
Maybe I know I've got some thoughts written down already. I'm sure everyone else has got some thoughts about this year. I think it would be fair to say that this year scrutiny as a whole has tried to be slightly more assertive and seek to be a proper check and balance on the administration. And it has felt, I think, listening to others and certainly on the panels I've been involved in, that has not been assisted for whatever reason. And I'm going to make it that vague at the moment. It would be helpful if we have a strong leader model to have a review that helps us ensure that we have strong scrutiny to balance that, especially in councils that are as marginal as Plymouth, because the cross-party working we seek to ensure does come from the work that tends to happen in scrutiny panels and the relationships people build in those and the knowledge people build through good scrutiny that enables them then to be good cabinet members at the point that they become cabinet members. And I think if we don't have good scrutiny, we're not necessarily ensuring we have good cabinet members, and we need good cabinet members. So that would be my initial perspective of an overarching what we should be seeking to achieve. There's lots of other bits, but Mary, you?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the whole scrutiny and overview process, I think all councillors should know how overview and scrutiny, good practice, is supposed to run. I mean, I seem to remember years ago going to a basic scrutiny questions sort of thing, and and it was like where, what, how, and whatever the usual standard. But I think all councillors need to have that opportunity. We can't make them go, but they do. But then certainly from the health, I can only really speak from the health perspective. The health service is and social care services within the UK are changing so much, and there's a big change to come with July the 1st, etc. So from my perspective, whoever sits on that scrutiny committee needs to know what is happening. And there are lovely little aids that go around, and Ross probably somewhere in the deeper depths of his computer has the video that he showed us a few years ago, what the NHS was all about, and it was brilliant. So I think we all need to know what our panel actually does. And all right, if you look at the content of each panel and sometimes it's impossible to get down to the minutiae, but I think everybody needs to know what it's about and what it's not about. And that to me is important. And also then the engagement of the portfolio holder. Certainly having sat as a sub on children's, to be told that the children's portfolio holder couldn't do the particular days that the scrutiny was on was a total ridiculousness. You know, that should have been identified at the beginning of the municipal year, and there should have been a discussion with the chair as to whether you move the day that the scrutiny is in to make up for that. You know, and I think that's what we have to think about. And again, the chairs have that role in, is the time of their scrutiny committee the right time? You know, even if we agree on the day, does 10 o'clock in the morning suit and whatever? And of course, one of the things that we've had to remember the last 2 years is scrutiny has been asked to look at COVID and how that has affected the city. And I think we are now moving away from that. And I'm not saying things will be back to norm, but on the other hand, they will be going much more back to the normal breadth of the panel. So I think it's an exciting time in that scrutineers that certainly over the last couple of years that have been concentrating particularly on one thing are now going to be expanding. So it's even more important that everybody, if they're on a particular panel, knows what they're doing. But there's all of us that could be subbing on other panels, that it would be quite useful to have those as open sessions, so that if I daftly chose to go to the performance briefing to know what the performance was all about, you know, I can do that. And I think that to me is what's important, is that none of us should think because we're only sitting on health or whatever, we can't go elsewhere. And, you know, the seats back in the rooms that any councillor can sit in and listen to what's being said. And I think that's what's important, so we don't feel disconnected. And it's all very well having all councillor presentations on various X, Y and Z, but those of us that go to them know how few other councillors take that opportunity. And that's sad really, because that's how you know what's happening. So I think there's a lot of things to think about, isn't there, for the new municipal year, if I'm still here.
Yes, and obviously there is all of that, and we will be talking a bit about that with forward planning in a minute. Before I bring Ross back in, because I know he wants to say something, I think, Ross, in ahead of any external review, can we, as management board, ask you to ensure that not just a quick quarter of an hour, half hour during the induction day, but that there is for all members an opportunity to have a proper session on what scrutiny is, what good scrutiny is, and we might have some bits that we discuss around that could add to that as we go in the rest of this discussion. But also that before the first meeting of every panel that's already in the diaries for the new municipal year, once membership is agreed, that a scene setting briefing is held for all those panel members, so that it's an expectation that there's I know we can't whip it, but hopefully chairs and vice chairs can get their teams on board, but that those are open to all members, so that subbing is done from an informed basis. And I know that, you know, we get changes in memberships and we get subbing during the year. It would be useful for people to have those, and maybe those sessions at the start of the year could be recorded so that members can see the scene setting briefing on what is happening, and that all members are signposted to the sources available from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, because that way, if they start to get, and the LGA, so if people start to get interested, they can go and find stuff that's not from Plymouth and say, I've spotted this happens elsewhere, well, I've spotted this is good practice, I want to make sure that we do it, so that it is opened up not just to the management board to do that. That way, we're not waiting for any external review to happen to start improving the way that we do scrutiny here in the city. Are members happy that we ask Ross to do that?
Yeah, and I think health scrutiny is the only one that meets at 10 o'clock in the morning, isn't it, at the moment? I think everybody else has gone back to 2 o'clock or early afternoon. I'm just wondering if we could do that as well, Ross, because that was one of the biggest beefs we had from health members, that there was a concern that they couldn't do the 10 o'clock. And I think that goes back to COVID times, I think, because we were all online initially, so it didn't matter so much. But and I know chairs normally consult about what time it is, but if we put it as 2, and then it, we can take it from there. From that would be just my thoughts on that.
Quickly pick up on that point. I was speaking to a couple of councillors the other day who are working, and they said to me, could either do it sort of 9:30 in the morning, so it shuts at 12:30, or the 2 option, because they take a half day off. Yeah. So I mean, one sort of anecdotal feedbacks on scrutiny is it's not kind of that worker friendly, if you like. So you're sort of trying to get your working mum in to take half a day off, in advance. She's got the calendar date, and but at the moment we've had a couple of members on our side that feel that they just cannot get into that meeting you're referring to, actually.
Great, and you've been jotting those bits down anyway, Ross, but I know you wanted to come in as well, so I think Mary's got it.
Oh yeah, no, it was just to you talked about learning about the health service, Mary, and I worked for the NHS for 2.5 years, and I certainly wouldn't claim to be an expert on all things NHS. So it's just to note that I think we wouldn't want to put members off by suggesting that they might need to have the breadth of knowledge that perhaps you might have built up over a number of years, and that actually the core basics are the important bit around whatever you might be scrutinising. And then actually, yes, the questioning, those sorts of lessons are always quite helpful for all of us. I think the other thing about briefing all members, and you're absolutely right, because you and I have sat in many of those empty rooms to receive briefings, but certainly with the move to Teams that we've seen over the pandemic period is something I think we should be taking advantage of going forward, particularly when it comes to briefing members generally. So, and actually then we can be quite fleet of foot as well. So that session we held on the hospital the other day, all right, wasn't brilliantly well attended, was it? And there was very few questions, but that opportunity has been provided for members, and that's what I think we can do as officers, is provide all of the opportunity that you could possibly want. And then, of course, it's up to you as members, and as you reflected, Chair, it'll be your groups and your teams that will encourage people to attend.
And I think it is getting that library of meetings, so that if come July the 1st, somebody thinks, oh, there was that briefing on the hospital plan, and now they're bringing the Lighthouse Centre into their plans to doing this, that and the other, they can go back and be directed and go back to that list of things. But nobody expects any councillor to know everything, and certainly we know that within the NHS, half the people working within the NHS don't know what the other half's doing and things like that. So I think it's all these aid memoirs that we've got that so we're not reinventing the wheel, we're not wasting officers' time, whether it's our officers or the health service officers or tax inspectors' officers or whatever, schools, all our time is precious. So I think this library of looking and developing the members' bits and pieces on the council's website has got to be good. The council's website is altering, so it's making sure that we all know where we can find these things, isn't it?
Well, sorry, Chair, just through you. So absolutely, the members' toolkit is going to be a clear focus for us over as soon as we get past next week. So we will start populating that with some of those recordings that we've talked about, and some more resources from the various sources like the Centre for Public Scrutiny, Governance and Public Scrutiny, and LGA. So yeah, absolutely, it's going to be a focus for us. So. And absolutely, it's a recommendation that I'll take forward in terms of the additional sessions.
Thank you. I think the other bit that is worth probably all members understanding is where there are statutory roles that we have no choice on, whether that's in the executive or in scrutiny. And I know, for example, in children's, there are some very statutory roles. In health, there are some statutory roles. The one that's often forgotten is there's also statutory role relating to Safer Plymouth and a crime and disorder panel. And actually, given everything, and we can talk about pressures on scrutiny, but all the stuff against violence against women and girls, actually we do have a crime and disorder panel, and that Safer Plymouth should be leading on stuff. We need to make sure that all members understand that, and that there is enough resourcing for scrutiny to undertake those statutory functions as well as other areas of scrutiny. Because otherwise we get to what we did this year, which is we managed to get the police in once, so we've not been able to schedule anything that we discussed because there was no time in the programme. And that is an effective way of us fulfilling statutory responsibilities. And we need to be thinking about that within any review we do. I just had a thought in terms of other things that we might want to review ourselves, whether that's subject to internal or external review. We've had almost no PIDs this year. The whole process of how members or members of the public can ask for things to be scrutinised is so hidden and so not known that people aren't making any real comments. So it comes down to us as management board to identify that. That doesn't seem to me particularly open, transparent or accountable. And so I'd like us to think about how we do that promotion of what are the big issues that should be faced on scrutiny. And I think because of I think partly COVID, but not only COVID, the time constraint of trying to fit everything that's on our to-do lists into a 2.5-hour meeting means that we only now predominantly hear from council officers and cabinet members, and we could discuss about whether we hear appropriately from cabinet members. And I won't, anyone is free to watch my last scrutiny panel and cabinet member engagement, and we've had the same, I know, in other areas. I think children's panels certainly had it. I think there's been times on Bilco that it's happened where cabinet members just aren't up to speed. But all of that sort of thing we need to be looking at. But how can we also involve not just our quangos in Destination Plymouth, but what about the trades within Destination Plymouth if it's Bilco? For me, if we're talking about equalities and diversity, how do we involve the community in those sorts of things? How do we involve people other than the health service in health scrutiny, and how do we involve people other than statutory partners in children? So what is that process we go through for scrutiny is to hear external perspectives more effectively? Because in scrutinising, that is our opportunity. And with John, and I've come across John a number of times in scrutiny this year. He's been open, we've had dialogue, and that's been really positive. We've done it again this morning. Obviously, we didn't include one element of the taxi trade that wanted to have a discussion in this morning's meeting with us. But if we'd done scrutiny on taxi licensing, we'd have had to have thought about how do we engage all appropriate people. Good scrutiny means we need to do that. And I think we need to be looking at all of that in everything. Do you mind if you've got your hand up? I've got a couple of other bits on my list, but I will come to those in the future. So.
Yeah, it's only because it's relevant, Chair, to what you've just been saying about engaging people outside offices, etc. And I know Richard will know this. It's certainly in education scrutiny, we've been trying really hard to, because of the mat landscape in the city, obviously the schools that we maintain are fewer and fewer. So we've been trying to engage MATs and MAT CEOs in the scrutiny process. We managed to have one MAT CEO who came, and the feedback I had was he found it a positive experience, and I'm hoping he will share that with his fellow MAT CEOs in the city, because I know Alison Botham has struggled a little bit with the kind of framework of how we get them into scrutiny, but from my point of view as chair of it currently, you know, they're educating thousands and thousands and thousands of our children in the city, and as an education scrutiny panel, how are we able to scrutinise what they're doing, to challenge, but also to champion and to hear good practice and what they're doing well and how they're improving things. So I think it's a really important that we want to have, we've invited the Regional Schools Commissioner, and I hope whoever is chair of that scrutiny committee in the next municipal year extends that invitation again. Because I think it's really important for us to hear from her thoughts about what she thinks about what needs to change, what needs to improve, what we're doing well, what we could be doing better. Yeah, so there's something about kind of spreading the tentacles out a bit more, because I think that makes it meaningful, and we can really as scrutineers have an input beyond the normal people who we challenge and hear from. Thank you.
Seeing lots of nods to all of these bits, Ross. I think that's quite useful. So thank you, Jemima. The other bits I just thought about were some of my experience reflecting on things is quite often we ask for stuff that, even if it's on tracking reports, can seem to take a very long time to come. And if I was to think of my panel, we asked on the budget reports for risks to be explicitly identified in the budget reports. We asked for that in June or July at our first meeting. It's still not been actioned, and we've been told now it'll be actioned for the next financial year. So it would have taken a year for a recommendation to be adopted, assuming that it happens. Similarly, we've had requests for information that hang over. Now, I'm assuming they've been made, but we shouldn't be chasing bits and pieces like that. There needs to be an understanding that scrutiny recommendations should be taken seriously. Not all recommendations need to go to Cabinet. We don't need to always have a scrutiny report to make things happen. But if it doesn't, it's going to feel like we're going to need to make reports to Cabinet on minor things to get things to happen, and that isn't a good use of Cabinet time, nor is it actually a good way for scrutiny to work. So there needs to be understanding, not only from democratic support officers, but from officers in other parts of the council, that this matters and that scrutiny responses should be responded to not just before the next scrutiny meeting when they've been chased, but actually as a matter of urgency. And so we need to deal with that. And the lead officers on scrutiny panels, who are quite often the officers who are responsible for the things we're scrutinising, which means although we have technical support, they're also sitting there with a role of slightly defending their services, need to be delivering. And certainly I'm not convinced that those lead officers are delivering in the way that they could be. And I wonder whether there should be at CMT a review of what are not only the roles of those lead officers, but I remember in the past we had a sort of lead support officer who wasn't necessarily from the area being scrutinised, and it was part of their development as a sort of team Plymouth member in how they went about understanding. Now, I know there needs to be thought given to that, but are there ways in which we support officer development through having someone other than the person being scrutinised supporting a scrutiny panel? Because I know that we have been hindered in doing work this year because our lead officer hasn't delivered it and we've got nowhere to go. And that's not very useful.
Certainly from when I was chair of the Scrutiny Management Board, I had a reassurance from the Chief Executive that the CMT had that discussion about who would support which, and there was a commitment that there would be swift and responses to recommendations and to the work of scrutiny. So I think probably it's going back now to the Chief Executive to say, can she reassess those officers that she's assigned to each of the scrutiny committees to make sure that that's working. There needs to be a review of that. And yes, I agree that it shouldn't always be the area supporting that, because as you say, sometimes it gets lost in the telling. Let's be generous to here. I'm not saying people are being deliberately obstructive, but it gets lost in the thing. So I think that now is the time to look for how Tracy and the senior management team look as to how that's done for next year. And I mean, this has happened again throughout the years as to who supports what. You know, Ross and I can sort of sit here and chuckle. And at one time it was deliberately that you had a very senior officer that supported a panel from a different area. Now, sometimes that got a little bit awkward, and some because they didn't know what the heck was happening in that particular. But that's not the point. It's making sure that they're a significant level that they can do things, rather than being a very junior officer who was sort of then intimidated. So I think, yeah, let's do that. And we've got the time now, because there's no more scrutiny meetings now till June. So Tracy and the team have got time to think about that. So that's got to be a recommendation from us.
Jemima.
Yeah, that's a very interesting concept. I wouldn't say it's necessarily happened with my scrutiny preparation particularly, but I guess it would circumvent any element of gatekeeping. And I just wondered whether there's some, if we do have the external scrutiny review, whether that forms part of that, whether they have an opinion or take on whether that would be a useful thing to do to improve scrutiny.
I think that's a really positive idea. Ross is smiling. As ever, we try things and we come back to them, and who knows. But I think it is worth us looking at all of those. In some ways, you know, I know we're drifting a bit around the agenda here, but what we're doing is helping Ross on the scrutiny management report, because I think a big bulk of the scrutiny management report is about what happens next to scrutiny. And here we're putting together a whole series of the management board reflections on a year about going forward, rather than reflections on the year and, oh, haven't we been wonderful? Because it's great to do the latter, but I think the former is more important. And just as a thought on that, I know we could all spend a lot of time talking about what we've just scrutinised, and normally we'd be doing that, but the new scrutiny panels will be the new scrutiny panels. We might or might not be the people involved in doing it, but they will be there. And so I'd like to make a suggestion that in terms of forward planning, we all go back to our democratic support officers. And Ross, this is a bit of a recommendation for us as chairs of democratic support officers, and plan the first meeting of the next municipal year now, and not leave it until after the AGM for a new chair to have to plan that meeting at short notice, because we've all got agenda items. Now, a new chair can look at it and say yes or no, but that gives officers time to start preparing it and everything else, rather than it being last minute, and that first meeting being almost what's going on, bring everyone up to speed, and it's actually, let's not waste one of our 4 opportunities in the year to do some proper scrutiny. And also, if there are select committees that have been held over, that for the first quarter of next year, we also get some of those PIDs done, and at least in diaries, so that once again, you chairs can remove them. But I sort of think of some of the ones we've done, like, or not done, that were about savings in this year and transformation. So, you know, the customer services strategy, which impacts on all sorts of other parts of the council, we still haven't done yet. It was urgent last June, July, and we need to do. And so I think maybe we start timetabling some of those in. You know, Ross, I know that we agreed that we'd slip member development because you were new in post, but we had said we'd scrutinise member development this year, and we need to be doing that because we're talking about it now. So I think if we can do that, that would help new chairs if it's not us, and would mean officers are at least working to something, rather than having to panic in the 2 or 3 weeks that they might get otherwise. Does that help on some forward planning thoughts for us? Mary?
And I think this is why it's important to have the pre-meet of the committees rather than waiting till the first scrutiny committee, because you'd waste time doing that instead of actively getting into scrutiny. I think that scene setting and people understanding what children's services do, what health does and whatever, that to me is that vital thing. You know, so early, very early June, late May, I think that needs to be penciled in now so that people know when the AGM says you're on X committee or whatever, they know it's in the diary so they can come and hear. And then, as I say, making it open for other people to understand what each of the committees is, that to me is vital. But as you say, there's those scrutinies that we've held off and been sort of I mean, particularly if I think about health, I mean, we know we've got to do the mental health scrutiny, no two ways about it. It's becoming more and more and more critical. And the other thing is the Dero dental services. You know, we need to be bringing that back, despite NHS England trying to put it down on the list. But I mean, it's got to be done. We've got more and more people on the NHS dental waiting list, and we're not getting the information from NHS England. So yeah, to me, that's two things that we're going to have to look at on the health scrutiny, regardless of who's around, because it's not fair. And Jemima no doubt has things on hers. The same with Richard and you on yours. So I think there are all things that we've deferred because of I mean, particularly for us on health, because of the activities going on, and totally that was the right thing to do, totally. But we can't keep putting it off.
And I do think even if things get changed, the fact that we start scheduling dates means that Ross can begin to organise his team resource to be able to make sure scrutiny happens. Because you know, otherwise we end up with, oh, we haven't got the time to do it, or other people aren't geared up for it, or the people in the services themselves say they haven't. And I think we need to be able to do that. So if we're able to give some lead in, certainly for the first 3 or 4 months of the next municipal year, and also some heads up as to what might be later in the year. You know, I know I've just sort of been asked around the Armed Forces Covenant, which celebrates 10 years of signing in Plymouth, but there is, I discovered a couple of days ago, a plan to change the way that that's organised. And I only discovered that apparently the portfolio holder hasn't been told yet. So I've just said something on air that a portfolio holder doesn't know. And so there are all sorts of things like that. And I've suggested that we do a task and finish on the Armed Forces Covenant to review what's been done and listen to people's perspectives on what does need to be done next, including not just the people sitting around the immediate table, but some of the Armed Forces communities, so that we get some chance to reflect. And I think those sorts of things are quite important and are easy to slip. So I think that there are some bits like that that we need to be doing. So I think if people are happy to do that, that will help the teams that support us, and if it's us or not, the people who come into these roles and are busy thinking, what do I do at my first meeting? What's in line? Who's lined up to do things? So I think that would be very helpful. I think just as an aside, and something that we might also want to think about in terms of next year and recommendations are, the council often makes decisions about scrutiny looking at stuff. I'm not sure what the process is for those council decisions to hit work programmes, because if they're not mentioned in the scrutiny panel, they fall. And actually, if as a council we decide something, or we request scrutiny, there should be a route through from council into work programming. And similarly, cabinet decisions might include scrutiny. And I know, for example, that the Equalities and Diversity Action Plan has 2 scrutiny references in it that, because they've not been through the panel, aren't on our work programme, but have implications for next year. Actually, we need to find ways for that. And similarly, the cabinet advisory groups, such as Corporate Parenting, Child Poverty and Mount Edgecombe, Tamar Bridge, don't always find ways for anything they do and recommend to go through, because it might not be to their panel, it might be to someone else. And I know at corporate parenting this afternoon, there was a whole thing about housing, which isn't a children education issue. So how does that hit the appropriate panel as a point that is a crisis for corporate parenting, where we have a responsibility as the parents of those children? So we need to find ways within thinking about next year for all of that cross stuff to happen, because I think that makes some sense. I also think that we should be saying that to follow papers should be exception, not the norm. That if there isn't time to get a paper ready for a committee a week in advance, then there probably isn't time for it to be on the agenda. And we should be asking for some of these things to be looked at scrutiny, and we can't even look at them before a meeting in time. And if I was to give an example of that, Cabinet meets next Tuesday. Of the 7 substantive items, 6 are to follow papers. Now, actually, I think we need to, as scrutiny, be saying that isn't transparent, it's not accountable, it doesn't enable engagement. Whoever the administrations are, whoever the chairs of the committees are, we need to be encouraging people to have that paperwork out. And so it's almost that within our recommendations, we're talking about whole council processes where scrutiny can add value. So I think there are those sort of thoughts I've picked up from tracking without us all going through. Do those sorts of things make sense and resonate with people?
Yeah, and I think, Chair, the other thing is we need to think about democratic support and how that's managed. I mean, Ross has got a tough job at the moment with, you know, sort of staffing levels, etc. And I think we all are empathetic to it. But if we find we're getting a concern, then obviously that needs to go to the Chief Executive for saying that scrutiny needs to be resourced adequately to meet its requirements.
As does the democratic process. And I don't believe that the reason we don't have 6 of the 7 cabinet papers published for next week is that Ross's team are sitting on 6 papers unpublished. My guess is that Ross's team haven't received 6 of the 7 papers from other parts of the council to put through the process that need to happen for sign-offs. And I know when I was a cabinet member, I was being told, you've got to get sign-off by this date, and if you don't, then it can't even go on agendas. And I think we need to just be reminding people that actually this is public accountability. It's not just scrutiny accountability. And I think you're right that there needs to be enough support in Ross's team to support the democratic and governance processes.
And certainly the Chief Executive was very minded when I was saying that if an officer has not got a paper ready on time, they had to explain to the chair of the committee why that paper wasn't ready on time. So I think there are things that we need to think about very carefully as about how scrutiny is given the respect it's due.
Yes, and I think that's the same for not just scrutiny, but all committees. If it was 1 paper out of 7, you'd think fair enough, but 6 out of 7, and when those are things like the Freeport and Green Deal stuff and so on, which are big and of city interest, those papers should be ready in time. And that's not a dig at you, Ross, because I don't imagine you're sitting on them for the sheer hell of sitting on papers, because that doesn't create any fun for you. So that was just a bit. I'm conscious of time. Are people happy not to go through all of their sort of bits from previous meetings, unless there's anything exceptional? Jemima?
It's not exceptional necessarily, but I just wanted to say, certainly in terms of education scrutiny in the next municipal year, there's a lot going on at a national level in terms of the care review, the Competition and Markets Authority study into the children's social care market. And I just, obviously I can't compel whoever the next chair might be, but I really think it's really important to keep an eye on national developments, certainly in children's social care in the next year, and making sure that that's being fed into scrutiny, whether it's our city response or how it affects the decisions that we're making in the city. And I just wanted to mention that here.
Thanks, Jemima. And the one bit I wanted to mention is that we had agreed that there would be a scrutiny workshop on KPIs. The KPIs for next year, I imagine, will be set by the time the next scrutiny round happens, and that hasn't happened. Can we make sure that we schedule some KPI engagement with scrutiny to help set appropriate ones?
Well, yeah, Chair, and obviously it's not just democratic services that are run.
Yeah.
So we can make that happen through the performance team, absolutely.
Chair, one of the other things is I think as scrutiny we need to be making sure that our agendas are, if I call fresh items, rather than repeated follow-ups. Follow-up should be done as papers between scrutiny. We should not keep filling our agendas up with follow-up, 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 follow-up. I think we need to be really careful on that.
Absolutely support that, but that leadership needs to come from the chair.
Oh, totally. I think, and that's what we have to make sure that we're doing that. Yeah.
I must admit, I populated part of October's meeting at my last meeting, but it was areas where scrutineers had concerns about stuff that was happening, and we asked for 6-month follow-ups in 2 cases and a 3-month follow-up in the other. And 2 of those were with staff side, and the other was leisure services, which we'll come back to on the agenda in a little while. So I think that those might be cases, but you're right, we need to find ways that those are done with enough time for papers to go out, members to have chance to review them and identify whether there is anything by exception they wish to have on the agenda. Otherwise, we can almost have a committee notes the papers that were circulated in advance and don't have any questions. Committee have questions on these papers that they want to be done, so that we're able almost as standing items on the agenda to get rid of a lot of those reports and deal with fresh things and stuff that were asked for. So and also, where those things are select committees or task and finishes, that time is allocated so we don't end up having to do, as we did with leisure services, what should have been a year-long select committee happening as one agenda item on an ordinary meeting, because actually, as you will hear later, that was not constructive for anyone. And I thought my budget scrutiny chairing session was the worst I'd had until I had that session and Mary was sitting in on them. Jemima was in on that meeting. It was a very unpleasant meeting. And so we do need to think about those bits. So I think that's been useful in terms of almost scooting around lots of things other than the scrutiny annual report. I know Ross has circulated, it's come to us on the table. There's quite a lot in there. I think, Ross, you've probably got a whole section that we've written for you almost now as future.
So I can amend and recirculate to the chair.
And I think if we, before Ross amends and recirculates, can we over the next sort of the course of today or first thing tomorrow, just go through it, check that we're happy with the things that are said about our panels. Are there things that are missing? Are there things we'd want to report differently? Ross is, he's new in role and has had to pick up this fairly quickly. And then Ross can make those amendments and circulate that together with the things that we're talking about, future recommendations. And Ross, when you do that, can we have a section that is specifically and early on a tribute to David James and the work that he's put in as he retires this year? I'm sure Mary would be very happy to work with you on that section and reflect on David's work, because we understand he's unlikely to be at full council because of Diane's health. If I'm presenting the report, I want to be able to say it. If he's presenting the report, he won't want to focus on that. But I think the rest of us would want to be able to say that in full council, and I think it should be part of the written record of the council. So if we're able to do that, Jemima?
I did manage to do that at the last children's education scrutiny. I did manage to thank David, so maybe that could be included on my section as well.
Yeah. So I think that can be done. So if we're able to do that, and then Ross is able to circulate so that we can turn that round, we are going to have to work fairly quickly because this is a to follow paper for full council on Monday. So we do need to get this tied up this week. But if we're able to feed into him corrections or amendments, and then once we get the thing back, once again, sort of within a day, turn round, if possible, for Ross to be able to do it for sign off. Are people happy once that's done for Richard and I to sign off the final version before it goes to full council? Thank you. That gets us then onto the leisure services contract. The leisure services was discussed at my panel. It was both a part 1 and a part 2 item. And the recommendations will include stuff from both part 1 and part 2. And I've put this on the agenda specifically because of concerns that were raised at my panel, and because they cross part 1 and part 2, I would therefore like to consider passing a resolution under section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972 to exclude the press and public from the meeting for this item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act as amended by the Freedom of Information Act 2000. Are members happy that that resolution is passed?
Yes, Chair.